In today's video, I'm going to review and show you the install of the CA-tuned off-road in-bed air compressor for the 4th Gen Toyota Tacoma. Let's get right into it. Behind this custom plate here made by CA-tuned off-road is a dual ARB air compressor. Now this kit that came from CA-tuned off-road will actually replace this section here, which was a storage cubby that came with the truck. And so you take that section out and you put the air compressor in here with this plate. So one thing to be aware of with this install is that the switch is actually wired directly up to the battery. And so if you leave the switch on and the truck is off, it could potentially drain the battery. And so just make sure that when it's not in use, you have the switch off. If not, it's going to drain your battery. So you might be asking yourself, why would I want an air compressor? Well, there's a few reasons. One of them is convenience. The second one is mainly when you're off-roading, you want to air down. And that's what I did when I was getting up on this trail. I aired down from about 40 PSI to 30 PSI. And when you do that, it's going to give you better traction. So after you air down, well, you need a way to air up. And having onboard air is really nice. The cost on this one was about $1,000. Now you can upgrade to a brushless motor, the ARB brushless motor. That's going to run you about $1,300, I believe. This is just the standard one. It was about $1,000. Now the brushless one is in theory going to last you a little bit longer than this one, but don't get me wrong, guys. This has kind of been the gold standard for a long time, and I'm not worried about this lasting years and years. So I opted just to save the couple $100 and just go with the standard. Now what I want to do is show you this air compressor in action. This hose is actually included in the kit. I bought this off of Amazon. This is a digital tire inflator. This is the ARB one. It was about $80 on Amazon, but I'm going to use this to show me exactly what the PSI is on the tires as I inflate them. So I turned the truck on just to be safe. Didn't want to drain the battery. So right now I'm showing at 29.5 PSI, and that's because I aired down to come up the trail here. So we're gonna go ahead and inflate it up. All right, that was quick. 40 PSI is where I want to be. All right, that's all 4 tires done. I'm really impressed at how quick that did that. So you might be asking yourself, why did I do it in the bed and not under the hood? Because there are options for that. Well, to me, the bed is the business end of the truck, and that's where work gets done. And to me, it's just better accessibility. I don't have to open up the hood every time I want to get to the air compressor. So that's why I chose to do it back here. Plus, I like to dirt bike, and you know, it's just right there. I can just easily pop in the air hose and fill my tires or whatever. So to me, that's why I chose to do that. The downside is you do lose a storage space because the compressor is going to replace that. So that's really, I would say, the only downside to this, but I have storage underneath my rear seats. And so to me, losing the storage wasn't going to be a big deal. So that's just a little bit about this air compressor, how it works and functions, and guys, I love it so far. I'm so glad that I actually have onboard air now. So with that, let's go ahead and jump right into the install. So this is everything that's included in the kit from CA-tuned off-road. Now it's pretty much plug and play with the exception of this wiring harness. We're gonna have to cut this and then extend it. Now, other than that, it's pretty much plug and play. I do have some additional supplies over here. Mainly this is just gonna be for extending the wiring, but I'll get into these a little bit later in the install. So the first thing that I'm going to be doing is actually assembling the air compressor with all the air hoses and getting that set up. All we're going to need for this step is the air compressor, the extra bolts, the manifold bracket, these two air lines, and then the custom-made plate from CA Tuned. Grab the air compressor, and there's this little plastic cap you're going to remove. And then I'm going to start with this connection here. There's two of these. So I'm going to Teflon tape this here because this is an airline and we want to make sure that we have a good seal. So I'm going to Teflon tape that, and then we'll screw it in there. Now you're going to grab the other connection. We're going to put it here on the manifold. Now you don't actually absolutely need the manifold if you're not doing air lockers. So this is mainly if you're going to be running air lockers. Now I did ask them, is it recommended to use this even if you're not using the air lockers? And they said yes. So I'm going to be putting it on. And to do that, we're just going to put this one here. I'm going to get some Teflon tape, put that on. Now I want to prep the air compressor with this bracket. This is a custom bracket from CA Tuned. We're going to remove these two bolts here and bolt this on for the manifold. Okay, we've got the bolts off now and we can put them back on and also put the bracket on. But I'm going to be doing some thread locker here. This is Loctite Blue. This is not permanent. It is removable, but this is just going to be giving us a little bit more protection against vibration. So it's probably a little bit overkill, but I'm going to feel a little bit better by doing it. Now we can go ahead and mount the manifold onto the bracket. Once you got your bolt on, you can go ahead and put the nut on and put a little Loctite on there. Now you're going to grab the braided air hose and you're going to take this connection, Teflon tape this, and we'll put it on this end. Got that on. Now we're going to Teflon tape these two connections and connect it onto here like that. Now on this side of the manifold, you're going to grab this rubber airline and we're going to Teflon this end and stick it in here. We got this hose on. Now you're going to take this fitting and we're going to Teflon tape this end and stick it on here. We're going to Teflon tape this end, and that's going to connect into the end of this here, but we have to punch that through right here. And then once you get it through, we'll twist this from the other side onto this connection here. Okay, and then you're going to want to leave this loose for now. We'll Teflon tape this end. We'll Teflon tape this end, and we'll be able to screw it from the other side. So you got to leave this loose so that you can twist it. If not, there's really no way to get this on because you're also tight here. So you got to keep this loose, and then we'll twist it once we got the Teflon tape on there. So we got the connection tight here by turning it on the other side. And then you can go ahead and tighten this one down now and get this tight. Now we can go ahead and put the chuck on. I recommend taking off this rubber boot because this is just going to help you be able to twist it a little bit better, but we're going to put some Teflon tape on here and go ahead and put it in there. Now we can go ahead and put the boot back on. There we go. Now I'm going to go ahead and remove this storage compartment from the truck. Now let me explain the wiring. So these are the two wiring harnesses, this one here and this one that was provided with the kit. These two ends are going to go into the air compressor. You will not be using these plugs. These are only if you're going to be running air lockers, which we're not going to be doing, so we will not be using those. And then this we will be using. This is the isolation switch. So this is for the switch that is on the air compressor in the back of the truck. And then this wire, this red wire, we need to cut and add additional wire to reach all the way to the battery. Now this other wiring harness here, we're going to cut all the wires here and add additional wires that will reach the battery as well. And you want to make sure to keep this as close to the battery as possible. These are the fuses, so you don't want to add on this end, and that wouldn't really make sense anyway because these are already terminated here, but we want to cut here, push this all the way to the battery, these fuses here. So we have an 8 gauge wire here. We have two red 10 gauge wires here, and then we have a black 20 gauge wire here. So that's what we're going to be extending from these. So I'm going to take this wiring harness and I think I'm going to cut right in here. Okay, we got those split. Now I'm going to use some heat shrink butt connectors on this end, and then we'll wait to connect it after I run it all the way underneath the truck just to make sure I can cut off any excess, and then we'll use the heat shrink connectors underneath the hood near the battery and connect this end. Right, I'm going to cut this one right here. We want to make sure and save this end. This is what we're going to connect to the battery. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the ARB switch, and it goes in here like this. Doesn't really matter which way you put it. So now I'm going to wire up the switch here. You're going to want to find on the wiring harness this one that says isolation switch, and there's corresponding numbers to match up the color of the wires. So red is going to be 3, 2 is going to be red yellow, 6 is going to be blue and white, and then the two remaining blacks are going to be 7 and 8. Now we can plug in both ends of the wiring harness into the compressor. Now what I'm going to do is figure out where to zip tie all of this extra wiring. So this needs to stay here with the compressor, and then this red wire for the switch is going to go to the battery. So everything else will stay here, and obviously this other one for the wiring harness will run to the battery as well. So like I said, I'm just going to find a good spot to put that and get it out of the way. Alright, so I got that zip tied up as best as I can. I wanted to keep it away from the heat of the air compressor, so I figured this would be the best place to tie it up over there. Now what I'm doing is I'm starting to put the wiring in this loom here, and then this is going to allow us to run it underneath the truck all the way to the battery. Okay, so once you've got to this point, I've kind of tied up my wiring here with some zip ties and kind of put it off to the side here. You actually don't want to screw it onto the plate yet, because if you do that now, it actually won't fit in here. So what you have to do is kind of turn the compressor in a little bit and fish it through the hole, and then put the plate on next, and you'll have to screw it in that way. So just make sure you don't screw it onto the plate, because if you do, it's not going to fit. Now you can go ahead and grab the air compressor and you can start to push it through the hole. This was a little bit of work just to try and angle it and get it through. It is a tight fit, but it is definitely doable. You're also going to need a second pair of hands here, someone that can go up underneath the wheel well and just hold the air compressor. And my wife was willing to help me out here, and it was really helpful because I could tell her to move it up or down. And once we did that, I was able to get the bolts right in place. Now I'm just gonna make sure that I put the switch up into place. There we go. Now I'm gonna use the factory bolts and put them in here. There's 6 of them. All right, we're done with that stage. You got everything bolted up. Now we're gonna move on to the wiring. So I've got the wiring ran. Let me show you where I ran the wiring loom. So I basically just took it from here and ran it all the way on top of the frame. So you can see up there, I just zip tied it and ran it all the way on top of the frame. And then I ran it up through here. And then what I've done is heat shrink and crimped all of the wiring. So this section is what came with the kit. This was the additional wiring that I bought. You're gonna make sure you wanna keep the inline fuse as close to the battery as you can. So we have the small black wire, the big black wire for the grounds, got the powers here, and then this one is for the switch. This is the small red wire for the switch. And I did an inline fuse here just to be safe. I did 2 amps in here. Probably don't need to do that, but I'm just doing it to be safe. Now I've got everything hooked up to the battery, so obviously the blacks go to the negative and the reds go to the positive. So it's simple as that. I got some zip ties here, just kind of holding everything together. But now let's go try it. Moment of truth. Yes, let's go. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Hopefully that video was informational for you. If you have any questions or comments down below, please let me know, and we'll catch you in the next video.